Good morning, everybody. Today we're going to be going over graphing. Now, the important thing to know about graphing is that even though it can seem really mind-blowing at first, the good thing is there's a pattern, there's a strategy that works every time, and if you use that process, you'll nail it. So the first thing to know is that when we have a graph, we have two axes. All right, we've got our x-axis and we've got our y-axis. Now, as we graph, you're always going to want to graph the x first. When we graph, we have what's called coordinate points. Now these are always shown inside parentheses and separated by a comma. The first point is going to be the x point, and the second point is the y point. So for example, if we have the coordinate point 3, 2, 3 is our x value and 2 is our y value. So to graph that, what we want to do is go 1, 2, 3 on the x-axis and 1, 2 on the y-axis. And this point, where they meet, is our true point. Now, when we have to graph something that we're not necessarily given coordinate points for, we're just given an equation, here's what we want to do. Let's say you're given y equals 3x plus 2. All right? Every time you see this, the first thing you want to do is make what's called a T-chart. Now a T-chart is going to look just like this. At the top, we're going to have x and y. Now, when we're given a formula in slope-intercept form, which we talked about before, you always want to pick x values and solve for y values. So when we're picking x values, let's pick 0, let's pick -1, and let's pick 1. Now, why do we pick these? Well, pretty much just because it's handy. You could have picked 2, 4, and 6, -4, -2, and 0, 2 million, 4 million, and 6 million. It just doesn't matter. But it's handy to start in the middle and go on either side. So now that we've picked our x values, all we have to do is say, okay, let's plug in our -1. So we have y equals 3 times -1 plus 2, which when we solve, we get -3 plus 2 equals -1. So here's our y value for when x is -1. So we fill that into our chart. Do the same thing for the 0. We get 3 times 0 plus 2 equals, well, 3 times 0 is 0 plus 2 gives us 2. And here's our y value for when x is 0. Do the same thing for the last one. See what you get? 3 times 1 plus 2 equals 3 times 1, 3, plus 2 gives us 5, and that is our y value for our last x point. Now we have 3 x values and 3 y values. This is important because we have to have good coordinate points to graph. So our first coordinate point is -1, -1. We could go over to our graph over here and say, okay, -1 on the x and -1 on the y gives us a point somewhere, and I'm going to use a different color here. Somewhere about here. All right, we have 0 on our x and 2 on our y. So 0 on the x, we're not going left or right, we just start at 0, and we're going up 1, 2, to right about there. And now we have +1 on our x, so we're going 1 to the right, and +5 on the y. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right about here. And as we can see, at that point, all we have to do is draw in our line. Don't forget your arrows. And there's our graph. Now, you can have a curveball thrown at you if you're given an equation like this. Let's say you get an equation that says x equals 4. Okay. Well, at the surface, this seems almost more simple than this guy up here. But where's your y value? Let's look. If we go back over to our T-chart over here, remember the T-chart is always, always, always how you want to graph. So make our T-chart. Now, we can pick our x and our y. Now for this particular one, we don't have a y equals. We just have x equals. Now this is telling us x equals 4. Okay, so that's going to be our first point we pick. It's 4. Now, can x equal anything else? Well, no, it's just going to be 4, right? we don't have a y value, so at y equals 0, well, our formula says x equals 4. How about at y equals 1? Well, our formula says x equals 4. How about at y equals 2,500,632? Well, our formula says x equals 4, always. So at that point, we know no matter what our y value is, x will always be 4. So all we got to do is go over to our graph up here and say, all right, here's 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's x equals 4. All right, if y is 0, x is 4. If y is 1, x is 4. If y is 2, 4. If y is negative 14, x is still 4. Every time you have an x equals value without any y value option, you're always going to have a vertical line, straight up. X equals 4, x will always equal 4 no matter what y value we have. Well, now this same idea follows if we have, for example, y equals 0, right? If y is 0, well, how about when x is 2? Well, y is still 0. How about when x is 3? Well, y is still 0. X is 5, y is 0. Anytime you have a y equals value without any x, you're going to have a horizontal line. So this guy will always give you one horizontal line. This guy will always give you one vertical line. And for each of these, don't forget, every time you're graphing, you always want to make your t-chart.